Yeah, first things first. Oh, sorry, it's talking to me. Yeah, thank you very much for having me this evening. Like Claire said, feel free to pop questions up in the chat, or raise your hand if you want to ask a question. You're welcome to just unmute yourself as well and ask a question as we go through. I'm very happy for this just to be an informal chat. Sometimes it's difficult to see everybody because I'm going to share my screen, so I might not be able to see you raising your hand. So do feel free just to unmute yourself and ask. But like we mentioned before, I'll make sure that I won't ramble on for too long so that we can have a nice amount of time to do some Q&A after. I am currently sitting in Shetland, which I don't live in Shetland. I actually live on the Moray Firth coast, but I'm working at the moment in Shetland, and we've had a little few issues with our internet when we've been doing some trainings over the last couple of days. So I apologise if it drops in and out. And just to let you know, I am sharing the house with my colleague at the moment, so she might be popping in and out, but we'll try and keep the disturbance to a minimum. So I'm just going to share some slides with you. Share screen. Where's my... Oh. Apologies. He's giving you a sneak peek of the whole training session, the whole session. Great. So yeah, like I said, thank you very much for having me along this evening. Claire's been telling me some of the other speakers that you've had in these webinar series, and it sounds like it's been a great few months of different talks. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction to me and who this person is coming along to talk to you this evening. So I'm Katie Dyke, and I work for the Whale and Dolphin Conservation. And so most of my time is spent doing this kind of thing that you can see in the picture. I do surveys for whales and dolphins, and I run a project called Shore Watch for whales and for whale and dolphin conservation. And that is a citizen science project where we encourage volunteers to get out to their local coastline and record whale and dolphins for us. Just going to check in the chat that everybody can hear me. Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, so we get folk to go to their local coastline and survey for whales and dolphins, and we have spots all around the Scottish coastline, and I will give you a little bit more information about that project if you're interested in that as well. But I do have the very fortunate job of getting to all of these beautiful coastal spots around Scotland. I'm currently in Shetland on work, which is pretty cool, going to all these different spots and looking out for the amazing marine wildlife that we have on our coastline. This picture is me on my local patch in Moray. I live in Lossiemouth on the Moray Firth coast, and this was a few months ago when it was pretty snowy, but we still had some good sightings of cetaceans along the coastline. And yeah, whilst I'm out on my shore watch trips, I always mix work with pleasure, and I take my whatever outdoor toys I have with me. So I also can often be found in the water. I'm very much a seagoer as well, and so I've got my paddleboard with me up in Shetland and been having a few great adventures when the wind's kind enough for us to get out on the water, and we've been exploring the coastline and the coves on our paddleboard as well. And I have had some incredible wildlife experiences whilst I've been out on the water as well, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have too. So again, just a little bit of background on me and where I work. So I work from the Scottish Dolphin Centre, and anybody that's been into Moray or around Moray will recognise the area. It's at Spey Bay. We work here because of these guys. So we sit on the mouth of the river Spey, and maybe some of you have paddled down the Spey and seen the centre as you've got to the end of the paddle. But yeah, we're here at the mouth of the river to engage members of the public about our resident population of bottlenose dolphins, because we are at a perfect vantage point to see the bottlenose dolphins quite regularly, particularly in the summer months. And so I also work for Whale and Dolphin Conservation. And so if you haven't heard of Whale and Dolphin Conservation, I'll just take the opportunity now just to let you know who we are and what we do. So we're a global charity, and we work for the protection of whales and dolphins on a global scale. And our main mission is to ensure a world where every whale and dolphin is safe and free. And we do this in a variety of different ways. So we do a lot of campaign work, we do a lot of policy work, we do a lot of education education and outreach, and work with people on the ground to change attitudes and behaviours, and then again working at a policy level to change the laws. So the 4 vital areas that we work in to ensure the survival of whales and dolphins is we work to change the law around captivity, because we are against captivity of these magnificent animals. So we work in different countries where captivity is still a thing, and try and change mindsets on the ground, but also try and change policy and ensure the best welfare of these animals that are in captivity, and where possible get them out of captivity to sanctuaries. And we have just set up the very first beluga sanctuary in Iceland, where there's a sanctuary to get once captive animals back out into the wild. Also, we work heavily on anti-whaling, so working on a policy level and a community level to change legislation there. And we also work we have a big work area about healthy seas, so how we protect our ocean, how we protect the species in there. And at the moment, we have a large part of our work is about bycatch. So it is quite the numbers of animals that get caught in bycatch every day is quite crazy. On a global scale, it's almost like 1,000 individuals a day get caught, and in the UK, probably 1,500 a year. But that's probably a very inaccurate number, because there isn't great representation of how many animals are getting caught as bycatch and entanglement. So we're always trying to work with policy and communities to try and change legislation there and change behaviour as well. So this is some really cool work that we're looking at the moment, and again, just to show how cool cetaceans are, whales, dolphins and porpoises, and how important they are, not just to provide a healthy ecosystem, but how important they are for us. And so we are doing this work on green whale at the moment, we call it. And so it's showing how whales are particularly great ecosystem engineers. So we need them to maintain a healthy ecosystem, but we also need them to maintain, to ensure that there's a healthy carbon sink. So actually the great whales of the ocean should be looked at as important as trees in terms of when they're absorbing carbon. And the ways they do this is through a whale pump is one of the ways. And so that's meaning when the whales, because they feed at a depth, they feed at depth, they move around at depth, and then they come to the surface. And as they're coming to the surface, they're pooping, and they're having, and so that then is forming like fertilization and fertilizing phytoplankton. Then phytoplankton absorbs all this carbon and is pretty much like a floating forest. And without the whales, we wouldn't be fertilizing this phytoplankton and having this incredible carbon sink. And it's shown that the marine environment actually can sink up to 25% of our carbon. So we really should be looking at the marine environment as a key resource in our climate, the fight to change climate. And also another fantastic thing that whales do is, because they are massive, they have long lifespans, they actually are carbon sinks themselves. So as they feed, they're storing all this carbon, and they live for a long time. So they're storing this carbon for a long time. But even when they die, most of the big whale species actually sink to the bottom of the floor. And so they're keeping all of that carbon right down at the bottom of the seafloor and not releasing it. And also they are feeding around 200 species. So again, just providing this amazing ecosystem. So they really are fantastic species, and I definitely fly the whale flag. And hopefully in today's talk, we can go into more detail about how fantastic these animals are, but also what we're likely to see on our coastline around Scotland, and particularly when you guys are out on the water, and give you a little bit more information about the ecology of these guys as well, and how best to spot them and behave around them. But just to touch on what I mentioned earlier, the project that I work on, Shore Watch. So like I said, it's a citizen science project. And so citizen science means getting communities and volunteers involved in scientific research. And you can have any amount of experience from very little to loads to get involved in anything to do with citizen science. And so we encourage our Shore Watch volunteers to go to specific sites around the Scottish coastline and carry out dolphin and whale and porpoise surveys for us. They take all this information down for us, give us that information back, and then that provides a really valuable, important data set for us to then understand the whale movements around the Scottish coastline and understand any trends, any things for concern, but we also share this data with policymakers, with developers, to ensure that we know how the coastlines are being used so that we can better protect these animals. So we can inform developers and governments on where not to possibly do development, and what times of years might be better to work in certain areas, or what areas are certain no-goes. It gives us a really good opportunity to understand where these important habitats are for whales and dolphins and porpoises. So it might be that a certain area is a really important feeding area, it might be a breeding area, or an important migration route. So if we didn't have people looking, eyes on the sea, we might miss a lot of this information. And we tend to think that whales and dolphins and porpoises, we know a lot about them, they're iconic species, but there's still a lot to be learned about these species, and we can continually learn. So we've trained probably about 1,000 volunteers across the coastline that watch from, at the moment on the mainland Scotland and the Western Isles, we've got about 26 shore watch sites where our volunteers watch from. And we're currently expanding those sites onto the Northern Isles into Orkney and Shetland. So that's where me and my colleague are at the moment, and encouraging our volunteers to get out and watch from those spots. And we've had pretty cool few days. We've seen orca and porpoise just in the last couple of days. So it really is an exciting place to be and watching for whales and dolphins. So this is an example of some of our selected sites that we ask our volunteers to go to along the Scottish coastline. And obviously we're adding sites in Shetland. And so apologies if anybody's from Shetland and are not seeing Shetland on the map, but those sites are being added. So we'll have about 6 sites in Shetland and another 6 in Orkney as well. So it's exciting times for volunteers in the Northern Isles to get recording their data. And just to touch on how fantastic Scotland is to see whales and dolphins, we actually, in the UK, we have about 28 different species of whales and dolphins. And in Scotland, we can see about 21 of these species. And from our shore watch surveys that we conduct, we've seen at least, about 11 species from the shore. So that's us standing on the shore, using binoculars to survey for the different species. So we've seen orca regularly from the shore, we've seen harbour porpoises, humpback whales, and that's just to name a few. And I'm going to talk a lot about the different species that we've recorded on the shore watch surveys, but also what you guys possibly can see along the coast. And when we open up for questions and chat later, I'd be really intrigued on some of the encounters that you've had whilst you've been out paddling around the coastline. But we are in an amazing place for marine wildlife. I remember when I was a kid, I always wanted to get involved in marine science and thinking about working with whales and dolphins. And I had visions of going to Australia or the Caribbean, and that's where you had to go to see these animals. I never even dreamt that I could see humpback whales and orca from my backyard in the Moray Firth coast. So pretty exciting stuff. And so, yeah, this is a great picture of a humpback whale and a water user, so a surfer here. And this is actually in Aberdeen, just on the beach in Aberdeen. And this individual humpback hung around Aberdeen for about 3 months, and he was kind of guaranteed seen from Aberdeen. And he actually got named Tarquin the Wonder Whale and was spotted quite regularly in, I think it was 2016, this picture was taken. But we are seeing humpback whales coming back to regular spots throughout the year. So we've seen humpback whales in Aberdeen loads, and first of force down around Kinghorn has been a really key spot to see humpbacks as well. But this picture just illustrates that whilst you're out on the water, you definitely have the opportunity to come into contact with some fantastic species. And for a number of people, the idea of paddling next to a humpback whale or an orca or bottlenose dolphins or common dolphins is an absolute dream and a far-fetched dream that they would never imagine or think that could happen. But you know, people that have been out on that are regularly out on the water, like ourselves, on SUPs or kayaks or surfboards or even boats, know that it is possible to see these creatures quite regularly. But I'm also going to talk about tonight how important it is to respect their space and how we should appropriately behave around these animals as well. So what I'm going to go through the next few slides, I'm going to give you some tips on how to spot whales and dolphins, how to identify different species, and how to give yourself the best chance of seeing stuff. So usually, I'm sure, apart from the folk that really adrenaline junkies, I know I go out on quite nice flat calm days when I'm paddleboarding, but I'm sure there's a number of you that quite like going out when it's quite choppy and there's quite a lot of waves. But in terms of watching whales and dolphins, we do quite want a nice calm flat day to be able to give ourselves the opportunity to really see something. You can see things in chop, but you're probably only going to see the bigger species that might be breaching out of the water. Some of the smaller species like harbour porpoises, it's very difficult to then see them when it's super choppy. So when I go out onto, either when I'm out on my paddleboard and I'm out on the water, or when I go to my shore watch sites and I'm surveying for whales and dolphins, there's a few things that as I'm scanning through this on the surface of the water, I'm looking out for a few cues to get my eye in to try and figure out if there's a whale, dolphin or a porpoise in that area. And so some of you might be really familiar with some of this stuff, but I always zone into if I see feeding birds or flocks of feeding birds, because that indicates that there's a lot of food under the surface of the water. And if there's a lot of food under the surface of the water that's attracting birds, it's probably going to be attracting bigger things like cetaceans as well. So as I'm using the term cetacean through this chat, cetacean is a nice easy term to collectively speak about whales, dolphins and porpoises. And it's actually a scientific term. It's their order that they belong to, but it also is somewhat easier than saying whales, dolphins and porpoises. So I probably will use the term cetacean throughout this chat so that you know what I'm talking about. So if I'm seeing lots of flocks of feeding birds, I'll usually take my binoculars and I have a good old scan under the feeding birds to see if there's anything breaking the surface of the water. And what I'm looking out for is a dark animal breaking the surface of the water with a distinct fin in the middle of its back. I'm looking out for the fin because sometimes you can get overexcited and you can think that a shag or a diver or a seal can sometimes be a cetacean because they move sometimes in similar ways. But when you see that dorsal fin, you know that you're looking at a cetacean. And then when you've seen that, you then try and ID it. Well, those of you that want to try and ID it. For Shore Watch and our surveys, we try and ID it straight away. And it is quite fun to figure out what species you're looking at, even if you're not doing it for a survey. The other things that you want to look out for once you're scanning the surface of the water is weird kind of breaks in the surface of the water. Sometimes you can see a ripple that is broken in kind of a different direction. And that might mean that something's under the water just about to break the surface of the water. So you're seeing a little bit of a disturbance in the water. Particularly on very flat, calm days, you can see what I call like a footprint or a slick on the surface of the water where something might have popped up and gone back down again. And then I always kind of scan around that area to see if there's something going to pop up a little bit further along the line. Blows are a good thing to look out for. Sometimes some of the smaller species like bottlenose dolphins and harbour porpoises, you won't tend to see the blow very strong, but some of the big baleen species like humpback whales, fin whales, sei whales, or if you're in other parts of the world, some of the different whales, you will definitely see that blow or maybe hear that blow before you see any other part of the whale. When I was watching orca yesterday, they were at quite a distance from where I was standing. I was standing at a really high cliff top, about 100 meters up, and I could see the incredible male dorsal fin of the orca breaking the surface of the water. But what I could also see as they broke the water was a nice tall blow, and that was helping me get my eye in. But particularly for, say, something like a humpback whale, you'll see the blow before you'll see the animal. And I've definitely tracked humpback whales by using the feeding birds so showing me where the humpback whale might be under the water, and then looking at that blow when the animal's going to surface. Splashes is a really good thing. I've definitely been out with the Murray kayak group I think it's called the Murray kayak group, out from Hopeman, and been sitting minding my own business on my kayak, and there's been a huge splash next to me, and I actually didn't see the animal that made the splash, but something just decided to breach right next to me, and I saw a huge splash and then nothing, and it was quite I must admit intimidating, thinking my adrenaline was definitely pumping, thinking where's the animal gonna come up next. But yeah, he just splashed and then disappeared again, but it was definitely a dolphin because it was a huge splash. So often you find that you see the splash first, you don't see the animal that's made the splash, or you'll see it a few minutes later. But if you do see a big splash, it's great to get your eye in on that splash and scan all around that area. Sometimes it can be a gannet that's made the splash, but often you'll see the gannet leave the water again, so then you know what you've seen. And so if you have seen something break the surface of the water, I always want to try and ID what species I'm looking at. And hopefully you guys have some interest in IDing what species you've seen too. And so when I first see an animal break the water, I then start asking myself a series of questions to then kind of break down what species I might be looking at. And usually to start with, I try and break down into, like, am I seeing a porpoise, am I seeing a dolphin, or am I seeing a whale? And I use the fin to help me figure that out. So I'll first look straight at the fin if I've seen it, and then I'll start asking myself these certain questions to figure out what the fin is looking like. And even if I can't ID what species it is there and then, if I've asked all these kind of questions to myself, and even if I've got a notebook to make field notes, I can then come back to a book or somebody that's more experienced than me and ask them what they think I've seen as well. But without all of these kind of good details on what you've seen, it's much harder. So the first thing I do is look at the dorsal fin. You want to see where the dorsal fin is on its back. So if it's in the middle of its back, it means it's a dolphin or a porpoise species. If it's 2/3 of the way along its back, you're going to be thinking that it's one of the baleen whale species. You're also going to think about the size in relation to its body, because the size of the dorsal fin can give you some indication of what species you're looking at, and particularly the shape of the dorsal fin. You can see just in this illustration that the minke whale is at the top, and it's got a real distinct hook dorsal fin, where the bottlenose dolphin, or actually that's a common dolphin in the drawing, has got more predominant dorsal fin with not so much of that curve to it. Another thing you want to look at is the head of the animal. You want to figure out if there's a beak there. Is there a bulbous head? Is it elongated snout? So again, you can see with the two illustrations here, the minke whale doesn't have a beak. It has an elongated snout, quite a slim, slender snout. And then the dolphin particularly this dolphin, the common dolphin, has a very quite long and slender beak, where if you've got something like a bottlenose dolphin, it has quite a short, stubby beak. And then something like a porpoise really doesn't have a defined beak. It's got quite a flat face. You'll also look at the colour of the animal. Is it like a subdued grey colouring over all of the animal, or are there patches of colour, or are there scratches and scarring over the animal that might help you ID what species you're looking at? We spoke about blows also, so having a look at the blow to see what kind of shape of a blow it is, how tall the blow is, how long it's staying in the air, and also if it's got a blow at all, because that will help you identify what species you're looking at too. And we always have a look at the behaviour as well, because that'll tell you a lot about the animal. The common dolphin here that we can see in the illustration, they're really active species. They breach really high out of the water. They love interacting with boats. They're super fast, and they often hang around in huge, like, super pods. So if you are seeing hundreds of common dolphins, you're probably seeing a common dolphin. So also thinking about the shape and the size of the animal that we're looking at as well will help you determine what species you're looking at. Is it robust? Is it big and kind of chunky animal? Or is it more sleek and slender? Is it really big? So the bottlenose dolphins that we have in the Moray Firth and along the east coast of Scotland, and pretty much all of the bottlenose dolphins that we see in Scotland are actually the largest bottlenose dolphins of the world. They're almost 4 meters in length, and they are just really big animals. And any of you that have seen them on your adventures will know that they are pretty large and intimidating when they come up to have a nose. In comparison to in Florida or Australia and more of the tropical areas, the bottlenose dolphins are only about 2 meters, and that's because our bottlenose dolphins are the most northerly population, so they need a lot of extra blubber on their bodies to keep them nice and warm in this cold North Sea, and they do have a great source of fatty fish to keep them nice and fat too. So this is just an example of that, some of those things that we were talking about. So you can see on this side here, in terms of the beak, this is a Risso's dolphin, and it doesn't have a beak at all. It has a flat face with this kind of bulbous area of where his melon is. And the melon is the part of the brain that sends out all the echolocation clicks. And they actually can kind of change the shape of the melon to direct the echolocation clicks. And then they'll pick up the echolocation clicks in their soft tissue around their jaw. But you can see on the common dolphin on this side, the beak is very long and slender, very different to that Risso's dolphin. And then if you start thinking about the color, you can see the difference. The Risso's dolphins have scars and scratches all over their body, where the common dolphins have more of a yellow patch at the front going down to a whiter patch at the back. So this is some real basic anatomy that we focus in on, but for anybody that doesn't know the technical terms for the different fins they have, their top fin is the dorsal fin, their side fin is the pectoral fin, and their tail fin is the fluke. And then this is the melon around the head and the blowhole, and you've got the beak where they pick up the echolocation clicks in the lower jaw there. So we've had a look at how some of the questions that we ask ourselves to help us ID the species that we're looking at. And now we're going to have a look at the different species and how we ID them, and a little bit more of information about the species in general. I'm just going to take a sip of my tea. So on the screen here, we've got the bottlenose dolphins. And no doubt anybody that's been paddling around the Moray Firth coast have seen these guys. So you can see in this picture, they're large, they're social animals. So the population around the Moray Firth coast currently stands at about 210 individuals. And they used to be called the Moray Firth population because they used to be seen a lot more in the inner Firth. So up towards Inverness and all around Chanry and that kind of area in the North Keswick. But as their populations expanded, their population is quite stable. They're reproducing quite a lot. They're getting bigger numbers in their population. So they've really expanded across Scotland, and now they're really termed the East Coast population. And we're seeing them as far down as the Firth of Forth quite regularly. We see them regularly in Aberdeen Harbour. They're even seen in the north of England as well, and all the way up to the Caithness coastline as well. They're very much a coastal species, and so in terms of our survey project Shore Watch, we get a great opportunity to see these guys. And for us out on the water, if we're doing coastal activities, the bottlenose dolphins are quite frequent in engaging with people out on the water because they are coastal species. So they're coming in the summer months to take advantage of the rich rivers around the Moray Firth that are feeding out into the Moray Firth, and they're feeding on salmon through the summer months. So they're often found sitting at river mouths, waiting for the fish to run, and throwing these big salmon around as they're feeding. They are very opportunistic feeders. So we do find that when salmon numbers are low, or when the salmon's not running, or when other fish stocks come in, we might have a time where we're not seeing the bottlenose dolphins so much because they've gone further offshore into the deeper water where they're looking for different species. They are very opportunistic and will eat a variety of different fish. They do also kill and attack the small harbour porpoises, and it's not for food, it's not for predation. It's quite simply, they sometimes are kind of big bullies and they're picking on the little guy, and it is certain groups of bottlenose dolphins that tend to attack harbour porpoises, flip them between their tail flukes a little bit to torpedo them out of the water, and we find a large number of harbour porpoises washed up on the shores, particularly in the Moray Firth. And I think there's an organisation called SMAS who work at looking at the dead stranded animals, and they get an idea of the cause of death, and they do some fantastic work around like population modelling and demographics of that population. And they said that in the Moray Firth particularly, about 60% of stranded porpoises are actually due to being killed by these guys. Hence why I'm always a little bit nervous when they come up to me on my paddleboard, because these guys are 4 meters, a harbour porpoise is about 1.5 meters, and I'm probably only about 160, something like that, and my paddleboard and my surfboard's not too much bigger. So they are hugely intelligent species and won't misidentify, but the fact that they are big top predators, I do find it a little bit intimidating when they come and suss me out. So we have different populations of bottlenose dolphins. We have our resident population in the Moray Firth at what I said, about 210 individuals. Then we have a smaller population on the west coast of about 80 individuals. And then we have around Wales, there's a large population around Wales. There's a resident population off the southwest coast as well. They seem to be a bit more transient, and they move between within the English Channel and move to France as well. And then there's a big population of Ireland too. But in terms of identifying these guys, if we think about those questions I spoke to about before, if we zone in onto the dorsal fin here, the dorsal fin's in the middle of its back, so it's telling us that it's a dolphin species. And you can see here that it's got a distinct curve to its dorsal fin. So it's got this falcate shape, and that's what I'm always looking out for when I see the dolphins, and I want to suss out if it's definitely a bottlenose dolphin I'm looking at. I want to look at this dorsal fin. It's not as predominant as some of the other dorsal fins of the other species that we're going to look at, but it definitely has that distinct curve. They're very large and robust. They're very grey in colouring, but you can see with this individual that's fully breached out of the water and is about to kind of do a kind of side flop to the water there, you can see that they've got very much of a white underbelly. You can see in terms of their behavior, they're very social. We often see them in not large groups, but kind of groups of around 8 to 12 possibly, but you can see them in smaller groups of 2 and 4, and sometimes you can see lone individuals as well, but you tend to see them interacting in a group, in a pod. They are very active, so you often will see them breaching out of the water and possibly tail slapping. Sometimes they can do this thing called spy hopping, where they pop their head out of the water and have a good look around. Their eyesight is actually pretty good out of the water, just as good as it is in the water. And then you want to think, what else did we talk about? Dorsal fin head shape, so you're going to look at the beak, and you can see with the bottlenose dolphin, they've got a very distinct bottle-like beak there. So then we go on to the harbour porpoises. Harbour porpoises are very common around the Scottish coastline. So around the whole of the UK is a really important area for harbour porpoises. They tend to not be as curious with us. So bottlenose dolphins will probably come and suss you out, but harbour porpoises usually tend to stay away from you. I was quite surprised when I was paddleboarding around the Isle of Harris, and I heard this little poof next to me, and it was actually a harbour porpoise that had come to check me out, and it was actually tailing me for a good few seconds, and just kind of on its side checking me out, which I was really surprised about, because they are quite shy. Like I said, bottlenose dolphins beat them up. They're predated on by bigger things like orca as well, so they do tend to have different behaviours and be a bit shyer. And so they're much smaller than the bottlenose dolphin, and if you look at their dorsal fin, you can see again it's in the middle of its back, but it's a very triangular dorsal fin. It doesn't have that distinct curve to it like the bottlenose dolphin does, and their behaviour is a lot different. So what you'll see with a harbour porpoise is a quick surfacing motion. So they come to the surface of the water and they almost do this kind of forward rolling motion. Some people say it looks like a bicycle wheel with a bit of a triangular fin on the top. Very, very kind of shy and timid creatures. So around the Murray Firth, we tend to see them not when we're seeing the bottlenose dolphins, but we tend to see them more in the winter months, a bit further offshore when the bottlenose dolphins come in the summer months. But particularly on the north coast and the west coast, and particularly here where I am at the moment in Shetland, huge numbers of porpoises. And particularly in Shetland, we're finding that there's big aggregations of porpoises with like 30, 60 individuals coming together, possibly for mating purposes, but there needs to be a bit more research to understand why these aggregations are forming. Usually you only see them in ones or twos. Sometimes on the west coast, I've seen them in large groups of about 12 to 20 in the kind of shoulder months where maybe they're coming together for mating purposes. But I've got a short video. Hopefully this will work and it won't butter too much. This is some drone footage that Nick McCaffrey gave us, and it is drone footage from Shetland. And you can see under this beautiful clear water here, the harbour porpoise. And what's nice about this drone footage is you can really see more of their behaviour. When we're on the surface of the water, we just see a quick surfacing pattern. But you can see the two interacting there together. And in a minute, one surfaces, and you can see how delicate and sweet these guys are. And if that surface next to you on your kayak or any of your water sports stuff that you use, you'd often hear this little puff. And in other dialects, also in Norse and Gaelic, of their name translates to puffing pig, and it relates to this kind of sneezing sound they make. But I absolutely love seeing porpoises, even though they don't do that kind of wild behavior like dolphins. I really like the treat of seeing these guys. So I'll move on. And so now we've got the minke whale. So unlike the harbour porpoise and the bottlenose dolphin, the minke whale is actually so the porpoise and the bottlenose dolphin are residents. The minke whale is actually a seasonal animal. So minke whales are coming down from the Arctic. So they're around Iceland and Norway, that kind of area, in the winter, and further north into the polar and the Arctic Circle. They're around there and enjoying the food up there, and then they come down into our waters between April and October. So we tend to see them in our areas, in our waters around the summer months. In some areas, we have found that they are choosing to overwinter, particularly some juveniles are deciding not to make the trek back up to the north if they've got a good lot of food here and they're happily feeding. They might stick around in our waters for a bit longer. So we have had a few minke sightings around December and January. And what you see with a minke whale is pretty much what you're seeing in this photo here. You have a very long back, followed by a dorsal fin about 2/3 of the way down the back. And you are just seeing kind of a dark animal breaking the surface of the water. They don't surface very high out of the water. So if you are kind of low down on your kayak or canoe, you possibly won't see them unless they're super close to you. You kind of do need a bit of a high vantage point. But these guys are the smallest of the baleen species. They're only about 7 to 10 meters. And when I'm talking about baleen species, they don't have teeth. So bottlenose dolphins and porpoises and a lot of the dolphin species have teeth, and they use echolocation to hunt their prey, and they catch their food and usually either use their teeth just to catch the prey and swallow the prey whole, and that's what bottlenose dolphins do. They don't chew their food. Or then you've got something like a porpoise or a rhizzo that actually have flatter teeth and they can chew. A rhizzo's dolphin actually use suction feeding, and they just suck them down. These guys, the minke whales, they have a series of baleen plates throughout their mouth. And so they have probably about 100 baleen plates. And so they do this thing called lunge feeding. They open out their mouth, they take a big gulp of water, they fill their throat full of water, they push this water across these baleen plates, which are basically a big sieve, and then they capture all the fish on the right side, so in their throat and where the water's passed through. So baleen plates are kind of like a sieve and a filter. So we've got all the baleen species, that's how they hunt and feed. So again, with minke whales, we see them across all of our coastline, but only in the summer months. So we see them a lot in the Moray Firth, a lot on the north coast and the west coast. And they tend to come in quite coastally as well. So they're not just big deep diving species. We are able to see them along our coastlines. As they surface, if you are on a really nice calm day, what you'll see is you'll see them breaking the surface of the water with their snout first, and then this nice rolling forward motion with a distinct dorsal fin 2/3 of the way back. You tend not to see a blow for a minke whale. You'll just see this surface pattern, and they don't tend to bring their tail fluke up. So if you are seeing a tail fluke of a whale, it's more likely you're seeing something like a humpback whale or a fin whale, which is very exciting. So again, I've got a short video. I'm going to mute this actually, if I can. So this is our minke whale. So you can see that surface pattern. So as it breaks the surface of the water with its snout and then it rolls over. So these guys will be looking out for shoaling fish. So if there's a big shoal of fish around, they're going to tend to be in the area for quite some while, feeding on that shoaling school of fish. And you can see in this video the clear footprints that I was talking about, and that helps you kind of track where the animal's going. Going to move on. Just talk about these guys, the Risso's dolphins. I think Risso's dolphins possibly are my favourite species of dolphin. I think because they're not the iconic image that you have of a dolphin. They're kind of the bruisers of the dolphin world. They're quite big and robust. They don't have that beak that we might imagine. Some people call them the smiling dolphin because they have this little cheeky smile because they don't have the beak. And you can see they have all these scars over the surface of their body, and that's what you use as their ID cues. And this very tall dorsal fin. It's very different to common bottlenose dolphins. Risso's dolphins like to hang out with different species. So I've seen Risso's dolphins with bottlenose dolphins, with white-beaked dolphins, and with common dolphins. And you can really see that when you see them side by side, you can really see the difference in this fin. The Risso's dolphin fin is very tall, it's very erect, it's got a very distinct point at the end of the fin there. But the thing that you really use with these guys is all this scarring over the surface of this body. They get this scarring through interactions with each other, so kind of they're rough and tumble with each other, but also their prey species is squid. And like I mentioned before, they use suction feed. They suction feed, so they suck the squid down, and in pure desperation, as the squid don't want to be eaten, they have these hooks on their tentacles, and they're scratching the Risso's dolphin. But all these scratches make it really easy for scientists and us at WDC to ID them. So we have an ID catalogue. We run a Risso's Dolphin ID catalogue, and other organisations run other species. So there's a minke whale ID catalogue, humpback whale, orca, and bottlenose. And it's the distinct nicks and scarring on their body, and most predominantly on their dorsal fin, that enables us to ID between individuals. That gives us a better understanding of how many individuals are in groups, how many individuals are in the whole pod, and where individuals are moving. And so the Risso's dolphins, you're most likely going to see Risso's dolphins on the north coast and the west coast. I haven't seen Risso's dolphins on the east coast. They're not as coastal as the other species that we've spoken about, so they do tend to be a bit more offshore, but they will come in a little bit coastally as well. I've seen them in the Minch quite a lot, and I've also seen them off of John O'Groats. They don't tend to be as kind of gregarious as the bottlenose dolphins. They seem to be a little bit more of the lazy species. They kind of have a different surface pattern as they kind of raise up out of the water and then sink back down. But there's been some really exciting research that we found with Risso's dolphins. Like I said before, they like to hang out with different species. And so we've seen Risso's dolphins and bottlenose dolphins hanging out. And the population of Risso's dolphins that are around the west coast, we think sit at about 80 individuals, alongside the bottlenose dolphin population on the west coast as well. And they've actually been interacting, and we've actually found that there's been a hybridization between the bottlenose dolphin and the Risso's dolphins. So we've got some really unique animals out there that look pretty much like a morph between the two individuals, the two species, and I've been lucky enough to see them a couple of times. But that does make identification of species a little bit more challenging, because you can feel pretty confident that you're seeing, you know, what a Risso's dolphin looks like, and then you see this animal that looks a bit like a Risso's dolphin, but it's got this beak on it. but they are pretty exciting. It's pretty cool to see the hybrids there. This is again another nice bit of drone footage from Nick McCaffrey of Rizzo's dolphins. Rizzo's dolphins, again, are a little bit shyer. They tend to avoid boats and they tend to not really interact with different water users. So this is, again, where drone footage can get some really incredible footage and to give us a little bit more of an understanding of the behaviours of these animals. So you can see here that whiteness of the animal. So that's all the scarring, and some individuals can be completely white because they've got so much scarring. It's usually the older individuals. And again, you can see that face, that it doesn't have that beak there. And all of that scarring is mostly up the top half of the body, as it has been caused by the food that it eats. And you can see that really tall, distinct dorsal fin there. So to chat about the common dolphins as well. So common dolphins are a really exciting species to watch. They tend to be in what's known as super pods. So I've seen them in pods of 30, pods of 300, 600. Some people have recorded pods of multiple thousands. You don't tend to see common porpoises in small groups, although I was shore watching today in Lerwick, and there is a solitary animal in the harbour of Lerwick, but that's very not too common to see solitary animals, particularly common dolphins. And so you can see in this picture, they've clearly got different colorations than the other species that we're looking at. They've got this kind of hourglass pattern, so they've got a very distinct yellow coloration at the front of their body, moving down into a lighter white colour. They're much smaller than the other dolphin species we've spoken about, only about 1.5 meters to 2 meters. But you can see this nice, long, slender beak is very different to the other species that we've spoken about. And even if you're seeing these animals from quite far away and you're seeing a silhouette of the animal, because they're smaller and slender and they've got this nice slender beak, you usually can tell that it's a common dolphin you're seeing. And I always use the behavior of common dolphins to help me get my eye in on what I'm seeing, because you often will see huge pods of them and you'll see them moving really fast. I tend to find they kind of move in synchronization with each other. So you see them surfacing all at the same time. And these guys do tend to love water users, usually the water users with engines, because they like bow riding. So I've been on a boat before where the common dolphins have been miles off in the distance on the horizon, and they've just made a beeline to the ferry that I've been on so that they can bow ride on the front of the ferry. And they can breach really high out of the water. So it is a pretty spectacular show to see a huge pod of common dolphins. These guys are more pelagic, so they like deeper waters. So we tend to find in the winter months, they're off in the warmer waters, in deeper waters, and then in the summer months, they're coming a bit more coastally. But again, we tend to see them more often on the north coast and the west coast, and occasionally on the Murray Firth and the east coast, but a bit more further out. So when you're off on ferries or a bit further out into the water. This is a quick video of just, you can really see how fast these guys are in this video. So you can see them moving alongside the boat here, and you can really see how many there are. And I think in a minute it spans around the boat and you can see how many individuals there are. And this one, you can see the common dolphin breach out of the water and the kind of height that it can get. And you can see when it breaches that very clear coloration pattern that it's got. I'm going to whiz through. I know I've rambled on for quite some time, but I've got a few more slides that I just want to cover, and then we can open up for some chit chat. So humpback whales, we've been seeing a lot more humpback whales in recent years. It's too early to say that this is a reflection of a population recovery, but we do know that a lot of the great whales, a lot of the big baleen whales that were really hammered by whaling days. So whilst I'm here up on Shetland, there was a whaling station in Shetland, and if you look back at the whaling records of the UK, particularly Shetland and Harris, the number of species that were taken, like humpback whales, sei whales, fin whales, even blue whales and right whales, that are now, right whales and blue whales are highly endangered. We were taking thousands of these individuals 100 or 200 years ago. And so they were really decimated in the whaling era. And because they live so long and they only reproduce one calf or two calves a year, their numbers really can't bounce back. Particularly with humpback whales, we have seen that some populations around the world are bouncing back and doing really well, but it's too early to say with our population that we're seeing if they're doing if they're bouncing back in the same kind of numbers. But we can say for certain we are getting more sightings of humpback whales around the Scottish coastline, and they are coming in really coastally. So you can see this picture here. This picture is from a shore watch volunteer, Monica Carey, and she took this picture while standing on a beach, and you can see the waves at the front here. They're actually the waves on the shore. So this humpback whale was probably in like very shallow water. He stuck around there for a number of months, just happily feeding. And we're probably thinking he was feeding on sprats whilst he was there. But again, these guys are baleen species, so they're feeding on big shoals of fish. So wherever the big shoals of fish are, they'll be there. So often herring, sprats, other species of big shoaling fish. These guys are about 17 to 18 meters, so much bigger than the minke whales that we were speaking about before, and they often execute a lot more behavior. So we often can see them fully breaching out of the water. They do things like pectoral side fin slaps, so they have their very long white pectoral arms, fins that they just slap on the surface of the water. You can see their tail as they take a deep dive and bring their tail fluke out, and if you're lucky you can see lunge feeding as well as they fully come out of the water with their mouths open. So very exciting species to watch. I've seen them in the UK, just kind of in shallow waters, so they haven't executed all of that behaviour. I've seen them in other parts of the world where they've been breaching and doing lots of activity, and I know down in Kinghorn there was a humpback sighted for a number of months at the beginning of the year. Lots of breaching and lots of activities seen from that humpback, and we are seeing that it's the same humpbacks returning to the areas. And so it could be a really positive story that our fish stocks are returning. You know, we decimated our herring stocks quite a long time ago, and now we might be seeing that because of marine protected areas, our fish stocks are returning, and we have been seeing in certain areas herring stocks have been recolonizing. So we might be finding that the humpbacks are taking advantage of this and enjoying being back in our waters where there's good fishing in the area. We are seeing these guys whilst they're on their migration. So they are up in the Arctic range when they're feeding, and then they move through down to the Caribbean or West Africa to breed, and they spend months breeding where they don't feed and they're just focused on breeding and bringing up their young, and then they return back up to the Arctic to feed. And so we're seeing them on this transition as they're moving up and down, and they're stopping off with us to feed. And so we are tending to see that we're seeing them at different areas, different times in the year, usually around kind of winter time, and then again mid-spring, and then late summer as well. But they tend to kind of be staggered and change as the fish move and as the different populations are deciding on when they want to move. So again, here's some pretty awesome drone footage of the humpback whale. And again, this is within the UK waters. This is in Shetland, from a chap, Nick McCaffrey, who took this. And from this drone footage, you can see the size of those pectoral fins. Those long white pectoral fins are about half the size of its body. And that there is where the animal is lunge feeding. So it's opened its throat, mouth, it's taken a big gulp of water, and you could see that white throat extending and filling its mouth full of the hopeful, a big load of fish as well. So we can also see white-beaked dolphins in our waters. They tend to be more pelagic, often deeper waters, and we are seeing a decrease in our sightings of white-beaked dolphins due to climate change and due to the waters changing. Because these are subsolar species, their habitat range has been pushed further and further north. I've seen these guys off of the Isle of Lewis, and again, they actually did really enjoy bow riding on the sailboat that I was on. So if you are out in good depths, that you can see these guys, they're quite exciting to see. Again, very fast, look very different to some of the other species we've spoken about because they're all very dark, all black, and they have this kind of white wisp on the side of their body and a very distinct white saddle patch at the back of their body that almost makes them look like a bit of an orca, but they are much smaller. But they do have this very distinct dorsal fin. You'd think by their name, white-beaked dolphin, that they would all have a lovely, nice white beak. Sadly, they don't. So if you're seeing a white-beaked dolphin with a black beak, it still could be a white-beaked dolphin. And then just to quickly go over some of the other species that we're fortunate enough to see in our waters, we've got the two top species up here is a sperm whale, and I'd be pushed to think that we would see them out on paddleboards or kayaks. They are very deep diving species. Sperm whales are seen, they're one of the deepest diving species. They can dive up to 3,000 meters, hold their breath for a couple of hours. They are the Moby Dick whale, so they've got a very big square forehead, and they really do look like submarines as they surface up out of the water and push that water along. And you can see this picture here in the top is actually two individuals, and they've got really straight backs with that very square head. And this is their iconic tail fluke as they're in deep waters. To say they don't come in very coastally, we do sometimes get some lost sperm whales, so they should be off in really deep waters of the North Atlantic, and it's usually big pods of bachelor males that are around in the North Atlantic, but every once in a while they can get a little bit confused around Cape Wrath and they can come into the North Sea. And we have seen them in the Murray Firth, and I've actually seen 10 individuals within a couple of K from the shore on the Murray Firth coast. And I was actually quite worried about them because they are supposed to be in very deep water. These guys use sonar, so they can't use their sonar when they're in shallow waters. So we were worried that these animals weren't going to get back out of the Murray Firth, but they did, and they were okay. This animal at the bottom here is the fin whale, and fin whales are the second largest animal of the whale of the ocean. So a blue whale is the biggest at 30 meters, and a fin whale is sitting about 25 meters. And pretty impressive to see these guys, knowing that you're looking at the second largest whale in the water. And I've seen about 12 of these individuals off of the Western Isles, but also they've come in, they're being seen at lots of different spots. They've been seen on the North Coast quite a lot. We've seen them in the Murray Firth as well. They've been seen off of Aberdeen. They're kind of popping up everywhere in the last few years. Again, it might be a really positive story that whale numbers are bouncing back, or our fish stocks are bouncing back. It possibly could be a bit more of a sinister story around the fact that maybe offshore fish populations aren't doing so well, so these guys are being pushed in. But again, if you're thinking about what you're looking out for with these guys, they're massive. So they look a little bit like a minke whale in the way they surface, but a minke whale is 7 meters, these guys are 25. So you'll just see a huge animal break the surface of the water. I've been next to a sei whale, which is 23 meters long, on a small boat, and that was pretty incredible, the size of that animal. So you really do notice the size of the animal, and they will have a huge blow. A fin whale will have a blow that gets up to about 7 meters. So even if you're on the shore or on a kayak, you're going to see that blow from quite a distance. And then they've got a really long back, and then you see this small dorsal fin with again a distinct kind of rolling backwards curve. I've seen orca in the last couple of days, and the orca are currently, there's lots of different populations of orca that we can see in Scotland. So we have the West Coast community that are sadly, there's not very many individuals of that West Coast community left. They are probably only about 8 individuals, and sadly, they haven't reproduced in the last 20 years. And the male of that group is called John Coe, and he's currently been spotted all around the UK as he's doing a bit of a tour of the UK that he does do every year. But most often they're seen around the Hebrides, out into the North Atlantic, over to Ireland, and around the small isles as well, and the Clyde, in that kind of area. Fortunately, they aren't reproducing because of us and our interference with them. So they are found to be one of the most toxic cetaceans there are, and they have a load of toxins in their blubber that's inhibiting their ability to reproduce. Then the guys up here in Shetland are probably a resident pod around Shetland. They've been seen, they're spotted all year round, and we think their population number is called the 27. So they're a family group that hang around Shetland all year. They are seen around Scotland as well, but they do tend to hang around in Shetland the most. And then at the moment we have another small group, and it's a family group that are coming down from Iceland. And in Iceland, they feed on herring, and they go around Iceland following the herring. And then around this time of year, there's one family group that have decided, I don't want to eat herring anymore. I'm going to go to Scotland on my summer holidays, and I'm going to feed on seal. So they come down here and feed on our seal pups around this time of year. So it's Musa and her family that are being seen quite a lot at the moment around the north coast of Scotland. And here's some pretty awesome footage of orca as well. And then I'm just gonna, I know it's 8, but I'm just gonna do a couple more slides just about how we should best interact around whales and dolphins if we do get to see them when we're out on the water. And I'll just show a couple of videos and give you a couple of slides on that. So if you're happy to let me chat for maybe 10 minutes more, and then I'll open up for questions. I just want to push this forward a little bit so you guys can see the pretty cool bit of the footage when they all come together. Might be buffering a bit more, but here you can see about 5 individuals there. And again, this is just off of Shetland. Hopefully it's not buffering too much for you guys. When videos work online, they're great, but when they don't work, it's a bit frustrating. This is a sei whale, which is similar to a fin whale, but a bit, like I said, a bit smaller, and got a very tall erect dorsal fin. And this is actually the sei whale that's currently being seen around Kinghorn, around the Firth of Forth. But you can see the size of that animal and the size of that dorsal fin. It's incredible that it's right next to the harbour there. And this is the fin whale. So the second largest animal. So pretty incredible seeing that huge blow and that underwater footage of them. I'll just whiz through to get to the slides about how we should interact around these guys. Oh, what have I done? Okay, I don't have time to talk to you all about this stuff, so I'll do an interlude of baby bottlenose dolphins. So I'm just going to push through. So I just want to briefly talk to you about a campaign that I'm running at the moment, which is called Rude to Intrude. And you can find lots more information about Rude to Intrude online. We have a designated website at wales.org/disturbance, and that gives you lots of information of how to best interact around these animals. And so the Rude to Intrude campaign is about raising awareness of, 1, how to interact around these animals, 2, that it's actually illegal to disturb them, and 3, we can report any incidences that we are concerned about to the police, and I'll let you know how we can do that. So it is illegal to disturb whales, dolphins and porpoises. And when we're out on the water, even though we don't have a motor, you know, I'm on my paddleboard. If you guys are out on kayaks or canoes or paddleboards, even though we would think that we probably have less of an impact than big motorboats, we still can have an impact, particularly if we're interacting with them in areas that are very important for calving and feeding, particularly some places like Channery Point. That's a key habitat where they're feeding. And if we're hanging around them too long, we can disturb that feeding behavior. So it's really important to think about ways that we can make any interaction that we have with whales and dolphins both positive for us, but positive for the animals themselves as well. All animals do need their space. So whales, dolphins and porpoises do need their space to feed, to socialize, to breed and interact with each other. Whales, dolphins and porpoises are hugely intelligent, and their social bond and their family bonds are really important. And there have been incidences in the past that our interaction with them can displace family groups from a particular area, but it also can displace family groups from each other. And so particularly if there's calves in the area, we should really be taking care around these animals. And where possible, it is fantastic just to watch these animals from shore. But if we are out in the water and these animals are around us or they approach us, there's a few things that we can do to make sure that we interact with them well. I'm not going to show this video because I've run over a little bit, but this video is online, and it's just some lovely footage of that drone footage of different species, and then some paddleboarding footage, and just a little bit of a reminder on to remember to give these animals space when we're out there. This video I will run over because it's probably easier for you guys to watch this video and listen to this rather than me chat about it and waffle on. So this is just 3 minutes. Cool. Well, hopefully that video worked for everybody. If you were struggling with the sound or if it was buffering, I would really encourage you to go to our website and find that video and watch it again. And if you can share it on your social media pages and just have that conversation with others whilst out on the water, that would be great. So just a few things to pull out from that video is if there are whales, dolphins, or porpoises or seals around us in the water when we're out on the water, do have a think about those approach zones. We don't want to approach those animals if it's going to disturb them. So think about keeping at 100 meters distance. If they approach you, obviously that's them in control of the situation, so that's fine. Do stay on their, so if you are kind of coming onto them, do approach up their side on, never go directly head on to animals or up the rear. Go so they can see you from the side. Do be aware if you're hemming them in, if there's coastline, dolphins, and then you maybe have a think about coming onto the kind of landward side of them so they can get away if they want to. And think about that time. So if you are in an area where they're not just transiting through and they're not leaving you, and you are possibly changing their behavior where they're at, if it's a feeding area or a social area, don't stay too long, just stick around for 15 minutes and head off again. And be aware of how the dolphins are behaving. If they are tail slapping at you, they probably don't want to hang around with you. If they are heavily breaching near you, they're probably telling you, please leave us alone. And also, if they leave, obviously they're much faster than us, so it's hard to follow them anyway. But if they do leave, do respect the fact that they have left and don't go chasing them. So we want them to be in control of the encounter. And so some things that you can do to help us and help cetaceans is you can report your sightings. So you can report sightings into WDC using our Shore Watch forum, or also the HWDT have a really cool app that do water-based sightings. So you can have that app and you can upload any sightings that you have. Please do spread the message about responsible behavior around whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Particularly seals as well. I think seals can get disturbed even more because as we come up to their haul out sites, they could get a fright and move off their haul out site. And that's a really important area for them to be resting. And if they are disturbed and have to move off that haul out site, they're using unnecessary energy. So please spread the message, have kind of chats with your friends and other water users. Please do share our video and yeah, try and lead by example. So when people are watching us from the shore, then, you know, if they see us doing something that they're like, oh, that looks like an incredible encounter, just chasing those orca down, I'm going to do the same. So yeah, lead by example where possible. So I'm sorry, I rambled through that last bit because I was very much aware that I was rambling on, but hopefully you guys took something away from that chat, and I'm more than happy to take any questions that anybody has, or to hear of any of your encounters that you've had whilst out on the water. But thanks very much for your time.